This is the Blooded Kill Team, the Traitor Guardsman, the chaotic flip side of the Astra Militarum coin. This is a kill team I have sat on for months and months and months and months because I'm not all that excited to paint them. I would classify these in the Games Workshop miniature category of normal dudes. And there's nothing wrong with a normal dude, but in a world full of alien dragons and undead Egyptian robots and glowing swords and wings and power armor, these are just some fellas. And there's nothing wrong with just fellas, but they don't light a fire under me to paint them. I'm also not a huge fan of the way Games Workshop painted these guys. They're very, very dark and it's hard to see the details. These are some pretty good sculpts and I want to try to uncover those sculpts. I want to paint them in such a way that I fall in love with them, that they look unbelievably cool, and I want to do it in a really efficient way. I want to see just how good I can get normal dudes to look. Now, I certainly can't call these guys boring. They are chaos after all, but 2 arms, 2 legs, and a las cannon is not necessarily what gets me up in the morning. And there are some standouts, like this Blooded Champion I kit bashed out of a Blackstone Fortress mini, and the Chaotic Ogren. I've been asked before, how do I force myself to paint? What motivates me to paint when I don't feel like it? Usually it's the promise of getting to use these minis in the sandbox that is 40k and Kill Team. I find just starting and getting through those first few steps that throwing on a primer helps a lot. It starts that snowball rolling. If you have any minis that you've been procrastinating on, those minis you've been holding off on, that half of Indominus you didn't care much for, or one of the 2 kill teams that came in that big box that you bought last year, go grab them and give them a start. I always like to be experimenting with my painting, trying to unlock new techniques that I can bring to my projects and make me a better painter, but I tend to be a little bit timid on the models I'm absolutely in love with. But on these guys, I'm gonna go nuts. Even with the Zenithal. I have 3 off-white colors that are just a little bit different than white paint, and I think using all 3 might give me an interesting, messy Zenithal undercoating to work with. I spray the models one by one, doing 1/3 cold white, 1/3 warm white, and 1/3 green white. The black primer desaturates these colors a little more than they already are, and on the bases, I dry brush some white paint over their cork towers. I wanted to mess around with some really thin cork I had laying around. It was an interesting experiment. I can't say it was overly successful. I can sort of see the 3 colors in there, but it's really, really subtle. It's mostly just a Zenithal with a little bit of warmth in it. Worth a try though, and it's still a Zenithal, so I've got a good undercoat on there. It's time to get painting. I threw some goopies onto my palette. Army Painter speed paints. A yellow, brown, green, and blue. For right now, I'm gonna focus on yellow and brown. For everything on these minis that's not the weapons and armor. I slobbered this in patches on the clothing, pouches, chainmail, leather, fur, pockets, bags, and everything else, working quickly while the paint was still wet to do some blends and transitions. After that, I made a tan paint to dry brush over this. I would say that these models are pretty impossible to do real edge highlights on. They have too many surfaces. Dry brushing to the rescue. With their clothing complete, it is time to tackle the armor. And one thing that really turns me off of the Games Workshop color scheme armor is its black armor, which I think is really reductive. It's like they already know they're the bad guys. It's kind of like in Transformers, the Decepticons calling themselves the Decepticons. Hey boss, what should we call ourselves? I don't know, how about the liar cheaters? I think it is totally fair in the world of Warhammer to become a traitor guardsman, because being a guardsman really sucks. You were literally a tithe paid by every Imperial planet. You were sent to the front lines, sent to the meat grinders. You will never retire, you will never return to your place of origin, and you're probably gonna get eaten by Tyranid. I think in that situation, it is totally fair to strike it on your own, ally yourself with something that you think to be more powerful than the Imperium of Man, Chaos, which to be fair is probably true. I want my guys not to read as evil soldiers, but just soldiers. Good, bad, who's to say? Just a good old-fashioned soldier that's maybe on the spiky side. Most of these guys have their heads and faces covered, so to make them stand out, I want to paint the heads a different color. Orange. Orange will make for some really spicy helmets. There isn't a speed paint orange that I really love, so I watered down some normal orange paint, and then used some speed paint to shade this like a wash paint. Then some yellow right over the dome for a highlight, and the heads pop from a mile away. Their armor was looking a little too clean, so I gave them a black wash to darken the recesses and a white dry brushing to bring them back up. For the armor color, I agonized over what it should be. I wanted something nice, something pleasant, and I found this light blue paint. I thinned this paint a lot with water, and I glazed it on, coming back in with a clean brush to pull it away from the top of each armor piece. I'm not really using the magical speed paint formula, where it pools and gets dark on the recesses. I'm just using the color and transparency to tint what I already have. Now my fellows are looking friendly, but the armor's a little too clean. I like what's happening with the blue, but maybe this can be a base for green armor. A little more speed paint thinned way down with water and glazing this here and there over the blue armor to make a watercolor-like finish where both colors exist on the armor and complement each other. Now their armor is looking tarnished and weathered like their clothing does. Like their armor has spent some real time under the chaotic suns. Although speed paint is billed as the perfect one-coat solution, which it actually is, I don't actually like to use it for that. What I like to use it for is tints and washes, and I find it works really well. Kind of going back to that original 3-color zenithal that I tried to do that didn't actually do anything on the models, using a whole bunch of different colors of speed paint to tint these guys definitely gave me that kind of colorful disgustingness that I was after. Now every single one of their bodies is done, but kill teams are made up of a whole bunch of unique operatives. And so now I'm gonna go one by one, giving each one that little something special. And I gotta start with this lump right here, the big ol' Ogren. His armor is painted exactly like his buddy, so the only thing left is the skin. I don't want any colors to stray too far away from my original palette, so I went with a yellow tan for the skin, breaking out some purple and magenta for the crab claw. I painted this quickly so the paint was still wet and I could blend the claw into his flesh to get a realistic transition from ogre to crab. Speed paint needs a light undercoat to work off of, so I rebase coated the teeth inside the crab claw in preparation for laying down more colors, going back to the blues I already used on the armor. And for the chaos star that is embedded inside him, or growing out of him, I painted with a gold paint and then a reddish speed paint to shade it. And no chaotic model would be complete without some rust, and there isn't anything better than dirty down rust. And being water soluble, it behaves a lot like the speed paint I've been using so far. I can lay it down, then push it around with a damp brush until it's perfect. Similar to the Ogren, the leader also has some chaotic spikes, and all the weapons in this team are gonna get some dirty down rust effects. I went back to the speed paint to shade the gold, and ever since I played Dawn of War, I can't paint a chaotic plasma gun without giving it a pink glow. On the Enforcer, I painted the Power Fist with a dark red speed paint, topping it off with a bright saturated speed paint. And I even mixed some normal white paint into the speed paint for highlighting. Speed paint is really just normal paint that can be mixed just like anything else. This guy also gets some gold, and for his Commissar coat, I decided purple would be an interesting choice. Not necessarily a good guy or a bad guy color, but something in the middle. And just like the armor, a glazing of blue paint onto the purple ties it in nicely. I like the color of his banner, but it does look a little like he's surrendering with a white flag, so I worked a Chaos Star into the flag, starting off dark and getting bright red. He's a very theatrical mini. Everyone else is a much more standard warrior, with just a few things to pick out. Some blood on the butcher's blades, I'm sure that name comes from his culinary skills. For the medic, his doctor's instruments need a good coat of rust. He doesn't get to clean them very much during battle. He has a very sinister look on his face, and speaking of sinister, I made up a watery blood soup out of a red and brown speed paint and a generous helping of gloss medium. And then I did the old paintbrush flick trick to put the blood paint all down his front, just like I did on the Chaos Terrain over on our Patreon. Over there, we have a new terrain pack every month. This month we have the Gothic Modular Trenches, a customizable network of walkways with bits to make them suitable for Imperial or Chaos factions. You can pick up the whole set through the EOB Terrain tier on our Patreon, hosted through Comics Games and Things, or you can subscribe to our tribes over on My Mini Factory. The shield guy has a lovely embossed Chaos Star that needs to be highlighted, and all the weapons got a dry brushing of silver, and their helmets all got a sponging of white paint to show dings and scratches. I'm getting so close. When I started these guys, I had no particular color scheme in mind, but they've ended up very nautical. Maybe these guardsmen's planet of origin, they were in part of the Imperial Navy. Not like the Warhammer 40k Imperial Navy like outer space, but like boats. Like somewhere in Warhammer, there must be boats, and maybe these guys were a part of it. The only thing left to do is the bases. The cork towers are already nice and highlighted, so keeping with the whole speed paint thing, I threw a tan color into my airbrush and dusted this on, giving the cork a nice tint. Now to add a bit of reality to the Office Max cork, I mixed up some burnt umber pigment powder with water to make a slurry, and every base got a coat of this. It makes a dry, dusty texture that'll stand out from their clothing and armor, and some grass tufts is the quickest way to add some interest and contrast to bases. This whole gaggle of traitorous guardsmen are ready for some black base rims. The Blooded kill team. A kill team I wasn't overall super excited to paint, but now I really love these guys. I went with a much more vibrant, happy color scheme than I've seen a lot of people do with the Traitor Guardsmen, but I really like it. And I painted these in my favorite style of painting super intense, detail-heavy miniatures, and that is not painting everything. These guys are essentially made up of two things. Their blue-green armor, and then their yellow-brown everything else. And I think that's a really, really good way to tackle miniatures like this, because it's not about all of the patches and bandages and pouches and boots. Those aren't the things that make the models. It's the silhouette, the overall shape, their vibe, as the kids say these days. And I think that's my favorite way of tackling really crazy, detailed miniatures. I love these guys. I'm very excited to get them on the tabletop. The Blooded kill team looks phenomenal. I really enjoy playing with the Veteran Guardsman kill team, and this is just the spikier, more chaotic version of this. So I'm super excited to get these on the tabletop and hopefully beat Sean with them.